dear beloved community. It's so wonderful to be together with all of you on this, the 7th day of March of the year 2021. I hope you're all well wherever you find yourself. It's such a joy to be sitting together with the Sangha and to have an opportunity to reflect on the Dharma. Today here in Mountain Spring, we participated in Clean Up Australia Day, which is an annual day here in Australia where the citizens are encouraged to come out and to clean up the neighborhoods, to pick garbage and tires and so forth that have gathered by the sides of the roads or in public areas. And it was such a joyful opportunity. We had perhaps about 15 or 18 friends who gathered with us today, and we're cleaning up around this beautiful village of Bilpin. It was such a lovely coming together of community, such a wonderful opportunity to build the community here in Bilpin. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of joy, a great feeling as we had an opportunity to work together to serve our community. It's a lovely day of really taking care of the land and feeling connected with the place that we live in. So I've really enjoyed receiving so many questions and suggestions for tonight's a la carte Dharma talk. Thank you so much for all of the suggestions. I was sharing last night in the Sangha that if we addressed all the questions, the talk would be around about 12 hours long. But I will, as we go through the continuation of our series of talks over the next few months, I feel that a number of the questions that you've raised will weave their way into those talks. And I think also we should have some more opportunities now and then for a la carte Dharma talks. So I've selected a few questions from the numerous questions, either through the Facebook group or by Facebook Messenger or through email, either to Mountain Spring or to my own email, that seem to fit together. So I hope that this talk will be of benefit. In Mahayana Buddhism, we hear a lot about the cultivation of two qualities that are considered to be like the two wings of a bird: wisdom and compassion. So many books and commentaries have been written about these qualities and how to develop them, as well as the ways in which they support and balance each other. For many of us, though, these qualities can remain only as ideals and concepts, and hard to embody in a practical way. Over the last couple of weeks, I've really been looking deeply into these qualities, and it seems to me that one practical and concrete way to cultivate wisdom and compassion in our daily life is to understand that in a fundamental sense, wisdom is not generating unnecessary pain and suffering for ourselves. And compassion is not generating unnecessary pain for others. True compassion begins to manifest when we're no longer afraid of our own or other people's suffering. This fearlessness with and curiosity towards suffering is, of course, a lifetime process and not something that occurs overnight. It begins with, in my opinion, recognizing that there's not anything inherently wrong with pain, with discomfort, or with dissatisfaction. It's as much a part of the way things are as happiness is. When we finally get it, and this awareness begins to surface, we run away from pain less and less, and we stop running after our idea of what happiness is. We begin to experience our heart, our bodies, and our minds as big enough to embrace both and see that they contain each other. As much as it's our human tendency, it's only when we struggle against pain, when we struggle against discomfort or confusion, that these things become what we call suffering. Suffering is what emerges when we're stuck in the repetitive pattern that our teacher Tay calls the second arrow. There's the story of a person who's stabbed by an arrow. It's already very painful when that person was stabbed by an arrow. But if we imagine that that person has the first arrow taken out, but then stabbed again in the same place with a second arrow, the pain is not double, but it's multiplied 100 times. It's 100 times more painful. There's the experience, and then there's the story we tell ourselves about the experience, the interpretation, or as I like to call it, the what ifs, rather than the what is. And most of the time, what we call reality is actually the what ifs, the interpretation. It's not the bare experience. For me, as someone who has the great chance to practice with physical illness, with quite a significant amount of pain, quite a significant amount of weakness, being constantly diligent and attentive to the difference between the what is and the what if in any moment is truly essential. It's not easy, but it's essential. As meditators, we diligently practice to recognize the difference between these two, the bare experience and the interpretation, or the what is and the what if. And we cultivate the capacity to stay with what is rather than getting caught up in the what ifs. When we do this, in my own experience, while pain might still be there, and it most often is, suffering is lessened somehow. There's a spaciousness that emerges. In this human realm, as much as we would wish it different, pain is mandatory. It's part of having a human body or having this human experience. But suffering is optional. So to understand the second arrow in our own life, take a look at the stories that you tell yourself about the experiences that you have. Differentiate them from bare experience. And how does it feel when you smile to the story and thank it for being there? But ask yourself if you're sure it's the truth. The third Zen ancestor, the Master Sun Zan, in his beautiful poem, Faith in Mind, in Chinese it's called xinshinming, he wrote, "The great way is not difficult if only you don't pick and choose." What an invitation into radical openness to our life just as it is right now, and to ourselves just as we are right now, and not seeking to manipulate it, of not getting caught in pairs of opposites, of picking and choosing happiness over suffering, the ultimate over the relative, this over that. If we've had a real insight, even for a brief moment, into impermanence, then we know that even if we try to hold on to something, it's going to change anyway. In fact, it already is changing despite our best efforts and our desperate attempts. An in-breath is changing from moment to moment. At an imperceptible moment, it becomes an out-breath. Our mind is changing moment to moment. It's always in a process of change. In my own experience, pain is not one thing, not one solid, unchanging thing. And neither is happiness, and nor are other feelings. They're a series of events, an endless flowing river that's never the same. What would it be like to have the courage to practice to not have a problem with whatever's arising in you. To just be with it. To look deeply into it. What would that wisdom look like in your own life? What would that healing, that wisdom look like in your own life? Let's enjoy the sound of the bell. Without wanting to become too dogmatic, which is always a temptation, I really wish that we would move away from using words such as positive or negative to describe our feelings, our emotions, and our experiences. All of the feelings and emotions that we have are natural parts of our human experience, and they're not inherently good or bad. The original word in Pali that's often translated as positive is kusala, and it means skillful. And the word that we often see translated as negative, akusala, in its original sense is closer to meaning not yet skillful. I find these to be very helpful lenses to look at the behaviors, emotions, mind frames, and tendencies that arise. Does this, whatever it might be, lead to more freedom of my heart? Is it helping me to release my desperate grasping? Is it in line with that deepest longing of my heart, my deepest aspiration? With these qualities, something can be called skillful. Whether emotions are positive or negative, to me, depends on how we work with them. Our practice, it seems to me, is to bring clear awareness, to bring mindfulness, to look at our experience just as it is. Not just to look at the things that we call positive, but to look at those things that are challenging. Those things that are difficult, the things perhaps we don't want to look at. Our strong emotions. Our practice is not a practice of suppression, but a practice of transformation. And if we're able to bring that clear awareness to look at our experience just as it is, we might discover, as we explore the roots of our anger, for example, that it is in fact a great teacher. There's a lot to discover. And in fact, that anger, although the energy might be unskillful, the root of that anger might have an element of skillfulness to discover. In Buddhism, happiness and joy comes about. It's nurtured, and it comes about when we develop the capacity to let go, to leave behind in each and every moment, not only once, but in each and every moment. And one of the deepest letting goes is to identify and to let go of all of our agendas. One word that we hear a lot in Buddhism, particularly in Zen Buddhism, is businessless. In fact, it's seen in Rinzai Zen to be the ultimate aim of our practice, to have nothing to do. What does it mean to cultivate the capacity of having nothing to do anymore? There are many layers to this, but on one level it means to become aware of and to let go of all of our hidden agendas. I want to get rid of this painful thought, feeling, sensation, or person. Or I want more of this pleasant sensation, thought, feeling, or person. I want more of this. I want less of that. Want. If we're not careful, if we're not attentive and discerning, then this want can become a massive and often hidden energetic thread in our meditation practice, in our spiritual life. Many times the thing that we want more of, or the thing that we tell ourselves is liberation, is actually our own habit energy, our entrenchment, if we don't look deeply. And we're not taking refuge in the Sangha eye, in the Sangha's insight. This is the shadow side. This is why we always need a Sangha. We always need a community of practice. The often subtle difference between want and aspiration is one that's incredibly helpful to pay attention to. I've spoken a bit this evening about Mahayana Buddhism. In fact, I began this talk, I think, with sharing about Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana means the great vehicle. It means we include everything in our practice. We don't exclude anything or anyone. Each of our experiences is, in fact, our spiritual life. In Mahayana Buddhism, in the great vehicle Buddhism, we emphasize what's called the bodhisattva ideal. Being a bodhisattva means to be available when needed, with an emphasis on being available, not caught up in doing. Rather than focusing on externals, a bodhisattva sees to the heart of things in a non-dualistic way. In an earlier talk, I shared that a bodhisattva is a being who has the capacity and the willingness to befriend all things, including pain and suffering. A bodhisattva is not operating from a neurotic place of needing to get rid of something or someone, or needing to fix, but rather through their presence, through their mindfulness, through their insight and their compassion, they change the situation through their way of being. A bodhisattva practitioner includes all things, even or perhaps especially the things and the people and experiences and situations that we're afraid of. Last Sunday, I gave a spontaneous Dharma talk here in Mountain Spring for the people that had gathered. I think it was about a 15-minute talk. And in that talk, I just remember one part of it at this moment in time, and I was sharing the story of how I was at a gathering of Buddhist teachers a few years ago, and at the end of that gathering, I received a blessing. And I'm an accumulator of blessings. If anybody ever wants to offer me a blessing, I'm there for it. And so I had the opportunity to receive a blessing from a wonderful teacher who was there, who came over to me and put their hands on my shoulder and offered me a blessing that was quite surprising. It was very surprising and actually a little off-putting when I first received it, but it's become one of the most powerful and important blessings that I've received. They placed their hands on my shoulders and said, "May you live a long life, and may you live a painful life." And then they shared that it's through the practice of turning towards our pain, our suffering, our difficulties, that wisdom and compassion arise. And so receiving that blessing felt like a very important empowerment. May you live a long life, but also may you live a life with some difficulty too, so that you have the opportunity to actually practice with something. Our teacher Tay has shared, we're often so quick to think about wanting to be reborn in the Pure Land or in a place that there's no pain or no suffering, but how on earth will we generate wisdom and compassion if we're never challenged in any way? If we only always get what we want? if we never have physical pain, if we can do absolutely everything that we want to do all the time, there's no growth. So this blessing was one of the most important and powerful blessings that I received. And I reflect on it daily. In my vehicle, I'll carry along all of my joys, all of my pain, all of my confusion, and not see anything as worthless. And I'll do the same for everyone and everything that I think is other to me. For the idea that there's another, or that there's some aspect of our experience that can be considered to be separate from our path, is, if we understand what the great vehicle is, it's a mistaken idea. It's not possible that there's something that's outside of our spiritual path. To befriend everything. This is the very essence of the bodhisattva path. It's the essence of compassion. It's also the essence of wisdom. Avalokiteshvara, the archetypal bodhisattva of great compassion. Often we see Avalokiteshvara personified as Kuan Yin or Kuan Am, and it's often pictured with 1,000 hands and 1,000 eyes. And these are symbolic of the many skillful ways that a compassionate mind and heart can manifest. Fierce, gentle, active, passive, and so on. They're not 1,000 hands and eyes that are constantly meddling in your own and everybody else's business. They're not 1,000 eyes that are watching over everything all the time, but rather available, ready to serve in many different capacities. When we think of compassion, we also think of skillful action, upaya. Upaya is the outward manifestation of compassion. Compassion is nice, but actually it doesn't have that much of an impact if we're just sitting on our cushion cultivating the mind frame or chanting the mantra of great compassion and so on, but not manifesting it outwardly. It's actually a deeply humbling thing to consider skillful action. How do we actually know if an action is ultimately skillful or not? If we as practitioners are looking deeply, then along with skillful action, could it be that occasionally there's also skillful non-action? Not in the sense of being uninvolved, but rather from a sense of holding space. It seems to me that the greatest teachers of our life will always point us back to the wisdom within ourselves. Because in fact, as the Buddha said, at the root, if we look deeply, we already know what we need to do and what we don't need to do. With any real insight, real practice, joy is inevitable. Joy is going to arise. A serious practitioner is not necessarily solemn. If we have insight into those what-if stories that we tell ourselves, then it's impossible not to become more joyful. I do not feel that serious practitioners are serious. Almost counterintuitively to our usual way of thinking, along with letting go, a factor of awakening called joy or bliss, in Pali the word is piti, arises. This quality wells up from within and saturates our being. To cultivate this quality and all the other qualities of awakening, the most important factor is developing appropriate attention. I've said repeatedly that the Buddha did not teach mindfulness. And I want to say it again here this evening for the record. The Buddha did not teach mindfulness. The Buddha taught how to cultivate appropriate mindfulness, developing the capacity to direct our attention to internal and external objects of attention that nurture the kinds of qualities that we would like to see in our mind, in our heart, and in our life. In the Samyutta Nikaya, in a sutra called the Ahara Sutra, the Buddha shared that in order to nurture joy, we should simply direct our attention to the internal and external qualities that nurture joy. There you go. It's very simple. To cultivate joy, we should simply direct our attention to the internal and external qualities which nurture our joy. So what brings you joy? What a beautiful question to reflect on. Maybe for this week, we can spend some time each day to consider what brings us joy. Simple. Write it down. And then focus more on it. Assuming it's an appropriate object. Focus more on it. That which you pay attention to will grow stronger. It's said that there are 3 bodies of the Buddha. The Buddha outside and the Buddha within each one of us. The first is the retribution body, the Nirmanakaya. This is the physical manifestation. It's called, in the technical term in Sanskrit, a Nirmanakaya, a retribution body. We see, with this way of looking, we see our physical body as a manifestation of all of the fruits of our actions. The things we eat, the ways we think, the kind of actions we engage in. I don't know about you, but I can really resonate quite often with this Sanskrit word, Nirmanakaya, that we translate as retribution body. My body can feel like a retribution, for sure. I don't know about you. And then the second body of the Buddha outside and the Buddha within is the Dhammakaya, the Dharma body. This is the embodiment of truth itself. A transformation body, an embodiment of truth. And the third is the Sambhogakaya, the bliss body or enjoyment body. We each have these 3 bodies, a Dharma body, a retribution body, and an enjoyment body. And we can cultivate them. I think it's especially important for us if we're long-term practitioners or serious practitioners to put some attention to cultivating the enjoyment body, the bliss body. We're quite diligent in cultivating the Dharma body, but some of us haven't really spent a lot of energy cultivating this enjoyment body, this bliss body. And the kind of places that we put our attention, the kinds of energies that we manifest, also manifest in our environment around us. It's said that a Buddha creates a Buddha field around him or herself, that wherever they are, then that becomes a portable Pure Land. And there are some of us also, it has to be said that we live in a portable hell realm because of the kinds of things we're focusing on, the kind of patterns of behaviors that we're caught in. But in the Buddha's teaching, the ultimate power of transformation is residing within each one of us. Each one of us has the capacity to be able to transform our situation. So to the question of cultivating joy, it's an essential quality of the practice, an essential element of the practice. And it's a very simple process. Focus more on what brings you joy. Let's have a sound of the bell. Today, as we were cleaning up the rubbish along the road, I was reflecting. It was a lovely experience, and many people were waving and calling out thank you and everything from the cars as they were driving past, as our group was cleaning the road. And I was thinking about something that I've observed. It seems to me that we live in a transactional culture of entitlement. I think that's the best way I can describe it. We have this tendency to always look at things in a transactional way and to have this kind of culture of entitlement. This mindset has been skillfully watered by ourselves and also by society. I think that this culture of entitlement often prevents us from receiving others or their response to us as a gift. Often with this mindset, if people's offering or response or behavior or curriculum is not exactly as we would expect, then we feel hard done by and resentment begins to flourish. That's another seed that, if we haven't cultivated this sense of joy, another seed that can begin to grow and be nourished quite strongly, the seed of resentment. One nice practice is to reflect each day on what we've received from the efforts of others. Even if we think that we've paid for something, someone put in effort to create that for us and offered it to us. Sure, maybe there might have been something that they could have done better or that we would have liked more. Maybe they could have done it differently, and it might be essential to communicate that. But by that practice of reframing from our carefully cultivated and carefully perfected attention to what is imperfect or wrong or what could be done better in every situation, to what is being done well, then rather than nurturing that seed of resentment and anger, we begin to experience things and other people in a more balanced way. It might also be helpful to direct our attention to the things that are being done for us that we may not even recognize. It can be helpful to open our eyes a little bit. Just look around at the things in our daily life that we may not even notice that others are doing for us. And if we start to notice these things, we will recognize that actually quite a lot is being done for us. And the real opportunity that we have is to take advantage of all of those good conditions. Volition, motivation, intentionality, I believe is one of the most important factors in our spiritual life. As I've shared earlier in an earlier series of talks, the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is called right intention, which is a continuation of the previous factor of the path, right view. If we see our situation for what it is, we see the nature of the world for what it is, for even a split second, then our whole orientation changes. There's not a lot of effort required, it just changes. This redirecting of our mindfulness energy towards letting go on all levels, of opening our heart and becoming progressively more open and free, is what's meant by right intention. In the middle length sayings in Sutra 141, the analysis of the truths, the Buddha shares with us very simply and very clearly what right intention is. The Buddha says, and what is right intention? A mind frame of letting go, a mind frame of goodwill, and a mind frame of harmlessness. This is called right intention. So each of those those forms of right intention helps to transform a corresponding kind of wrong intention, or as I like to call them, not yet complete or not yet skillful intentions. The intention of letting go is a good medicine for this intention of desire, of wanting, of thirst, of grasping. And the intention of goodwill, of cultivating loving kindness and goodwill and compassion, is a very good medicine for the intention of ill will, of harm towards ourselves and others. And the intention of harmlessness is a good medicine for the intention of harmlessness towards self and others. thought or intention is usually the forerunner of most things. Our intentions also point back to our key mindsets, the kind of habitual mind frames or views that we hold, and the kind of views that have given rise to our actions. When we have an incomplete view of something, and we know, as I've shared earlier, that all views are by their very nature incomplete. We don't see things like in a complete way. We only see them from one small perspective. Then if we have an incomplete view, the outcome is wrong intention, and it gives rise to unhelpful actions, flailing around without making a difference. When our intentions are in line with our deepest aspirations, our actions will reflect that. And if our intentions match our deepest aspiration, then they are a confirmation that the views we hold are right views. If we understand even a little bit the Four Noble Truths internally in relationship to our own life, then the intention of letting go naturally arises, of not thinking that our true security or safety comes from holding on to objects, people, or situations, or emotions, or for many of us, our entrenchments, of understanding the noble truths in relationships to others. It nurtures the other two aspects of right intention, of loving kindness or goodwill and harmlessness. We see that, like ourselves, all others fundamentally want to be happy, even if they don't know how. And this nurtures a sense of loving kindness. And again, seeing that, like ourselves, they also suffer. This gives rise to a feeling of not wanting to harm or hurt another person. One helpful practice around intentionality is to consider why we're doing, why we're saying, or why we're thinking such a thing. And to consider whether the thought, the word, or the action that we're engaging in or about to engage in arises from letting go, from goodwill, or from not wanting to harm, or from their opposites, even subtle. Speaking of suffering, the suffering that we see in others and we see in ourselves, suffering is a translation of the word dukkha. And we had a question about what is suffering. The Buddha was a direct and concrete teacher, and he defined dukkha very clearly and concisely in his very first recorded teaching. He said, "Now this, friends, is the noble truth of suffering, the first noble truth. Birth is suffering. Old age is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Association with the disliked is suffering. Separation from the liked is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. In brief, the 5 skandhas are suffering." Before we continue, I personally wish, as a little add-on to my comment about our tendency to translate kusala and akusala as positive and negative, and my wish for us to transform that, I'd also wish we would find another translation for dukkha that rather than suffering. Dukkha means something closer to ultimately unsatisfactory. It might be a good idea to spend a few moments to understand some of the roots of this word dukkha. Sukha is, of course, happiness and bliss, and dukkha is the opposite of that. It can be translated, as I just shared, as ultimately unsatisfactory, suffering, painful, and so on. So to respond to the question of what is suffering, the Buddha responded very directly and very clearly, also very concisely. Those different categories that the Buddha presented in his sharing, in his first discourse on the Four Noble Truths, are categories for us to contemplate, to use to look deeply into our experience and to recognize right in the heart of our own life. Sariputra, one of the Buddha's senior disciples, elaborated on each of these categories a little further. He said, so, and what is birth? Whatever birth, taking birth, descent, coming to be, coming forth, appearance of aggregates, and acquisition of sense experiences, and reactions to those of living beings is called birth. Sometimes when we hear the word birth, we think of physical birth only, or physical death. But here in Sariputra's elaboration, we find a very helpful definition of birth. Of course, there's physical birth, but there's also the birth of an idea. There's the birth of a feeling. There's a birth of a perception. There's a birth of sensation. There's coming to be, there's coming forth, there's appearance, there's also dissolution of all of these things. There's our reaction to sense impressions. So what a helpful definition. In a previous talk, I've also shared about the fact that the word that we translate as birth from Pali, which is jati, doesn't only refer to physical birth, but this moment by moment arising and passing away of form, of feelings, of mental formations, of consciousness, of each of the cells in our body. So this, I find, is a very practical and helpful way for us to look into and experience the ultimate unsatisfactoriness of birth, rather than birth just as a concept. But we can experience this continual arising and passing away right now within our body, within our mind. And Sariputra continues, and what is aging? Whatever aging, decrepitude, brokenness, graying, wrinkling, decline of life force, weakening of the faculties of the various beings in this or that category of beings, that's called aging. So you can also use this category to reflect on your experience. I was sharing with a friend who was here in the monastery that old cliche that today's the youngest we'll ever be for the rest of our lives. So we can look at and contemplate the aging that we experience. Nice way to do that is to, I've seen those experiments of people that have taken a photo of themselves every year on the same day for a couple of decades. You can see it very clearly. Or you can look into your body and see the wrinkles that are appearing, see the decline of the life force. As we get older, we can't do the things that we used to be able to do. The weakening of the faculties. Yeah, like a simple one, we don't hear as well, we don't see as clearly, and so on. So reflect on those elements in your own experience. And then Sariputra continues, and what is death? Whatever deceasing, passing away, breaking up, disappearance, dying, death, completion of time, breakup of the aggregates, casting off of the body, interruption in the life faculty of beings in this or that category is called death. And then what is sorrow? Whatever sorrow, sadness, inward sorrow, inward sadness of anyone suffering from misfortune, touched by something painful, is called sorrow. And then what is pain? Whatever is experienced as bodily pain, bodily discomfort, pain or discomfort born of bodily contact, that's called pain. And what is distress? Whatever is experienced as mental pain, mental discomfort, pain or discomfort born of mental contact, that's called distress. And what is despair? Whatever despair, despondency, desperation of anyone suffering from misfortune, touched by a painful thing, that's called despair. And what's association with the unpleasant? There's the case where undesirable, unpleasant, unattractive sights, sounds, aromas, flavors, or tactile sensations occur, or that one has connection, contact, relationship, interaction with those who wish one ill, who wish for one's harm, who wish for one's discomfort, who wish one no security from this suffering. That's called the suffering of association with the unbeloved. And it continues on. So I invite you, when you look at all of these categories, when you consider suffering, the Buddha was very concrete. And these categories are also very concrete. But the Buddha just didn't share things for us to write them down in various treatises and commentaries and position papers and not actually consider them in our daily life. The Buddha hoped that we would listen, reflect on, and apply these teachings as reflections in our daily life. So if we, with the question of what is suffering, it's very, very clear. And the Buddha offered a very clear invitation and a very concrete practice. This is really Buddhism 101, to understand deeply the nature of this pervasive dissatisfaction that we have. So I invite you to take that very pithy and very concise definition of the Buddha and to reflect on those elements within your own life, to discover whether you find that to be a noble truth for yourself also, as you reflect on these categories. Because otherwise it's the noble truths, the Four Noble Truths in particular, are just things that we recite. They're objects of faith rather than discoveries of insight right within your own life. So that would be my invitation. We use the contemplations to understand our own situation and the situation of the world around us. Sometimes people say that Buddhism is pessimistic because of the awareness and emphasis on becoming aware of dukkha. I would say that, in fact, Buddhism has a holistic view and tends towards the optimistic, because the Buddha said that we, each one of us, or you, can transform our situation through generating the insight of the Four Noble Truths in our own life. This is a very practical and a very concrete teaching and practice. Dukkha, your suffering. Not just a general idea of suffering, but clearly directing our attention to whatever and whenever we experience something in the categories that the Buddha offered. That we understand that suffering. We understand where it comes from in our own experience. And that we see, are we ready to release that even a little bit, and to explore what happens if we release that. And then we have the realization that, and the experience that it's possible to transform our suffering. I want to reiterate an invitation that I've made a few times. I really would like to invite all of the meditation practitioners to make a commitment to ourselves and to each other that from this point on, we're going to stop moaning and complaining about suffering and difficulties. It's actually just part of the way things are in this samsaric realm. If we really take on board this concrete and, in my view, empowering teaching of this first noble truth and all the noble truths, then within the context of the noble truth, suffering is to be fully understood. Your suffering is to be fully understood. And the task that it offers us, the work that it invites us into, is to generate full understanding. And in that way, rather than being something that is wrong or bad, or that we have to get rid of or ignore or desperately run away from, it's a great teacher. The noble truth of dukkha, which is incapable of satisfying ultimately, or painful, is the basic insight that we expect happiness, we expect bliss from states and things which are impermanent. And in that way, they're never going to provide us with real and lasting happiness, only momentary tastes. So as a solid practitioner, rather than blaming everyone and everything, practices to look deeply and understand that each situation of our life can be understood from within as honestly and thoroughly as possible. I was reflecting on what I think might be one of the most powerful and transformative practices that I'd like to offer in conclusion of this talk this evening. It's a question that was offered in one way by a teacher a while ago, and I find it very helpful in my own practice. And I was thinking about the question for a young person that I received. And this question I think could be helpful for everybody of all ages, not just young people. And that question is, whenever we encounter a situation, since we've got so much propensity towards ill will towards ourselves and ill will towards others, and I think it can be a very powerful, in my own experiences, it's a very powerful and transformative practice that as often as possible through the day, we ask ourselves, how would a person who truly cared about themselves and cared about others respond in this situation? How would a person who truly cares about themselves and cares about others respond in this situation? That holding that awareness can be enough to be very transformative. And I think if for a young person to practice that at school, to practice that at home, and for those of us who are less young to practice that, what a powerful thing, what a beautiful thing. So I want to offer that at the conclusion of this talk today. So I hope that this talk was enjoyable, was beneficial, that you received something from it. And I want to thank all of you for the beautiful questions that you offered that were woven into this talk in various ways. I look forward to responding to the questions that were not able to be responded to directly this evening, but were already energetically part of this talk at a later time. So enjoy 3 sounds of the bell to bring this talk to a close. So I wish you well wherever you might be.